Hey Gremlins, welcome back to my channel and another episode of History with Miss Barney, Civil War story version. Are you sick of hearing that yet? Because I am! First of all, congrats, you have made it to the final week of distance learning and you guys have been doing amazing so far, so keep it up, you are almost to the end. Real quick, in attendance question news, so we had our Elite 8 and Alexander Hamilton, Jamestown colonists, Kit Carson, and George Washington are moving on to the final four. Good choices for the most part. I am honestly delighted that you guys chose the Jamestown colonists for some reason. I don't know why, I was not expecting that. So today we are going to be talking about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Yesterday you guys learned about John Wilkes Booth, who was a famous actor in the South and the North at the time, one of the most well-known actors in America, to be completely honest with you. You guys learned yesterday that he didn't like Lincoln because he was from the South and because Lincoln was anti-slavery, and since the war was coming to a close after Grant defeated Lee, Booth was just like going out of his mind, like he couldn't handle the South losing. But one day when he was getting his mail at Ford's Theater, he found out that Lincoln would be attending that night's performance, and he basically just decided then and there, you know what, I'm gonna shoot the president. You know, as one does, I guess. So this plot was thrown together pretty quickly. He had a bunch of henchmen. If you guys remember, they had tried to kidnap Lincoln before. So he got his henchmen back together, put some plans in motion. He actually sent one of his guys to kill the Secretary of State at the same time he was killing Lincoln, and another guy to go murder the Vice President. Neither of those was going to be successful. The Secretary of State was injured, like, really bad, and then the guy who was supposed to kill the Vice President chickened out at last second, so. But obviously Booth's part of that night is the most famous part, and so we are going to be reading a chapter from Chasing Lincoln's Killer to explore what happened that night. So without further ado, let's get going.
Legend has it that John Wilkes Booth was hiding outside in the shadows near the front door of Ford's as the presidential carriage rocked down the dirt street and slowed. Wherever he was, it is almost certain that he somehow watched with his own eyes to be certain that the Lincolns were actually inside the theater. And he probably wondered whether other guests in the box were the type who would pose a threat to his plans. It didn't matter, really. No one was going to stop him from going through with it. It was now about 9 p.m., time for Booth to go inside the theater for the first time since the Lincolns had arrived. Although the actor had entered the theater after the performance had started, he was still on schedule. The play was like a clock. Every word spoken was another tick of the second hand. After hearing some familiar dialogue, Booth would know, to the minute, how much time remained in the performance. He knew that he had at least another hour. He left Ford's. In a little while he returned to his alley stable where he had left his rented horse, a bay mare. He led the horse down the alley by the reins to the back door of Ford's Theater. He asked theater employee Edmund Spangler to hold his horse for him. Spangler said he was too busy moving scenery. Another theater employee, named John Peanut for the snack he sold to theater patrons, held the reins of Booth's restless horse while the actor went inside. Once inside Ford's, Booth wanted to cross behind the stage to the other side of the building where a door led to a narrow passageway that ran to the front of the theater. Booth asked an employee if he could sneak across the stage concealed by scenery. That was impossible, he was told, as a scene that required the full stage was being performed and there was nowhere to hide from the audience by creeping behind the scenery. Instead, Booth would have to cross under the stage and emerge on the other side. Booth lifted a trapdoor and dropped down into darkness. He could hear the wooden planks of the stage creaking overhead, the distant, muffled voices of the actors, and laughter from the audience. He climbed the stairs at the end of the passageway, nudged open the trapdoor, and entered the area that ran lengthwise between Ford's and the saloon next door. He emerged on 10th Street. Anyone who saw him now would assume he had come from 10th Street to take in the play. No one in the theater, except a few employees, knew he had a horse waiting out back. There was time for one last drink. Booth walked into the Star Saloon at around 10 p.m. The narrow, dimly lit saloon attracted actors, stagehands, and playgoers from Ford's Theater next door. Alone, he drank whiskey. Any customers who recognized the handsomest, best-dressed man in Washington kept it to themselves and did not disturb him. Booth slapped a few coins on the bar and left without saying a word. As he exited onto 10th Street, he noticed the president's carriage, parked and waiting to take Lincoln back home. In the alley behind Ford's, John Peanut walked Booth's impatient horse back and forth. It was time. Booth entered the theater lobby, listening to the dialogue on stage. He was still on schedule. He climbed the curving staircase to the balcony. following the same path the Lincolns took to their box. He walked slowly along the wall. One theater patron, still hoping to witness General Grant's arrival, looked up from his first-floor seat and saw a man approaching the box. He recognized Booth. Booth could see the door of the vestibule that led directly into the president's box. What he saw, what he did not see, surprised him. The door was unguarded. He expected to see an officer, a soldier, or at least a policeman seated there. Instead, seated near, but not blocking the door, was Lincoln's servant Charles Forbes. Booth showed Forbes something. To this day, no one knows what words they exchanged or what Booth showed him. Was it a letter or a calling card? A card with Booth's name on it would open almost any door in Washington. Forbes did not attempt to stop him. Booth turned the doorknob and pushed open the vestibule door. There was no guard. No one stood between him and the President of the United States. Inside the box, the Lincolns were enjoying themselves, not because of the play, but simply from being together, out of the White House, during their happiest week in Washington. Seated in his rocking chair, perhaps thinking of their carriage ride that afternoon, Lincoln reached out and held Mary's hand. In pretend embarrassment, Mary scolded her husband for his boldness. "What will Miss Harris think of my hanging on to you so?" Lincoln replied to the last words he would ever hear his wife speak. "She won't think anything about it." He smiled at her affectionately. Booth closed the outer vestibule door behind him so quietly that no one heard anything. Bending down, he felt along the edge of the carpet near the wall for the pine bar, part of a music stand he had hidden there that afternoon. When no one was watching, he had entered Ford's, sneaking into the vestibule and box, and made his preparations. He found the bar, grabbed it with both hands, and wedged it quietly, tightly, between the wall and the door. Now no one could follow him into the president's box. The actor's black eyes adjusted to the darkness, while fixing on the only light in the dim room, a faint pinpoint of light coming from the peephole that someone, probably Booth, had bored through a panel on the door into the box. Booth peeked through the dot of light on the door, seeing the interior of the box. Lincoln sat at the far left of the box, closest to Booth, in his rocking chair. The left side of the president's body turned toward the audience. He faced the stage below. Mary sat to Lincoln's right, seated on a wood chair. On her right was Clara Harris, and next to her Major Rathbone seated on a sofa. Booth could enter the box and shoot Lincoln without having to get past the Major. On stage, there were 4 scenes left before the end of the play. It was around 10 p.m. Booth plunged his hands into his pocket and withdrew his weapons. In his right hand was the .44 caliber Derringer pistol, and in his left the sharp Rio Grande camp knife. The actor, Harry Hawk, entered the stage. It was not yet time. There were too many actors still on stage. Booth listened to the dialogue of the play for his signal. In a few moments, Booth knew Harry Hawk would be alone on stage and would speak a line guaranteed to produce such energetic laughter that it would drown out the sound of just about anything, including, Booth hoped, the sound of a pistol shot. Booth's thumb pulled back the hammer of the Derringer until he heard it cock into firing position. His hand reached for the doorknob. Though he could not see the stage, he could hear the dialogue. Now, Booth knew, only 2 actors remained on stage. The tension was unbearable. The dialogue spoken on stage no longer sounded like words, but like the last ticks of a dying clock winding down. It was 10:13 p.m. Once Harry Hawk was alone on stage, Booth opened the door and stepped into the president's box. Hawk began reciting the last sentence Lincoln would ever hear, a series of corny insults that delighted the audience. Lincoln was so near. If Booth wished to, he could reach out and tap him with the muzzle of the pistol. No one in the box had seen or heard him enter. They all continued to watch the action on stage. Booth began the performance he had rehearsed in his mind again and again. He stepped forward toward Lincoln, raised his right arm to shoulder height, and extended the pistol forward. He was so close to the president, now all he had to do was point the Derringer. Booth squeezed the trigger. The comic line spoken by Harry Hawk, "You sock-doodling old man-trap," was followed by an explosion of laughter from the audience. The black powder charge exploded and spit the bullet toward Lincoln's head. The muzzle light flashed for a moment, like a miniature lightning bolt. Had Booth succeeded? If he had only wounded Lincoln, then the president, even at 56 years old, would have been a worthy opponent. The idea of the president fighting back against the young, leaping, and sword-fighting actor is not as far-fetched as it sounds. With his creased and weary-looking face atop a thin 6-foot, 4-inch frame, President Lincoln might have looked old and weak. The war had taken its toll, but beneath his baggy coat and trousers there was a lean and strong body. Too soon doctors would discover and be amazed at the apparent difference in age between his face and body. Lincoln had not seen Booth coming. The bullet struck him in the head, on the lower left side just below the ear. The ball ripped through his chestnut-colored hair, cut the skin, penetrated the skull, and because of the angle of Lincoln's head at the moment of impact, made a diagonal tunnel through Lincoln's brain. The wet brain matter slowed the ball's speed, absorbing enough of its energy to prevent it from exiting the other side of the skull through the president's face. The ball came to rest in Lincoln's brain, behind his right eye. Lincoln never knew what happened to him. His head dropped forward, his body lost all muscle control and sagged against the rocking chair. The sound of the pistol shot hung in the box for several seconds. It traveled to the stage below and echoed throughout the theater. The pistol shot did startle some people in the audience. Some thought it was part of the play. Some did not hear it at all. Major Henry Rathbone, seated in the box just feet away from the president, was an experienced Army officer, familiar with the sound of gunshots. He was the first to realize that something was very wrong. He turned to his left. The smoke from the gun, now tinted red from the gaslights, partly blocked his vision. Rathbone rose from his seat and stepped in the direction of the president. At that moment he saw a wild-eyed man, his face ghostly against his black clothes, hair, and mustache. Like a demon, Booth emerged from the cloud of black powder and sprang at him. Rathbone lunged for Booth, grabbing him by the coat. The assassin broke free, shouting "Freedom!" and throwing his right arm up as high as it could reach. Rathbone saw what Booth had clenched in his fist, a large shiny knife, its blade pointed directly down at him. At the last moment, Rathbone raised his arm to protect himself from what was intended to be a death blow. The major grunted in pain. His quick defensive move had saved his life, but the blade sliced through his sleeve and into his upper arm. Blood gushed from the deep wound. Booth wasted no more time finishing off Rathbone. The clock in his head was still ticking down. If he was going to escape the theater, he had to get out of the box at once. He swung his leg over the side of the railing at the front of the box. By now, some members of the audience had looked up, seeing a man climbing out of the president's box. As Booth positioned for the leap to the stage, Rathbone came at him again, grabbing his coat tail. Thrown off balance, Booth got tangled in the framed portrait of George Washington hanging on the front of the box. One of his riding spurs snagged one of the flags that decorated it. He managed to free himself and landed, off balance, but still on his feet. He felt something wrong in his left leg, near the ankle, but there was nothing he could do about it now. Booth scrambled to center stage, turned to the audience, and stood up straight. Though every second was precious to his escape, he knew that this was his last appearance on the American stage. This would be the performance he would be remembered for. All eyes were on him. He stood still, paused to build suspense, and thrust his bloody dagger victoriously into the air. The gas stage light shone on the shiny blade now stained with blood. "Sic semper tyrannis," he thundered. It was the state motto of Virginia. Thus always to tyrants. Then Booth shouted, "The South is avenged." Harry Hawk, the only on-stage actor when Booth made the leap, did not understand what was happening. Hawk, more than anyone else in the theater, was in the best position to hear the shot and see Booth climb onto the balcony. Hawk had known Booth and was not likely to mistake him. Hawk stood directly in Booth's escape path. When Booth had nearly reached him, Hawk fled. As Booth moved across the stage heading for the wing, one audience member heard him say to himself, "I have done it." Booth fled into the wings, slashing his dagger at anyone who got in his way. The orchestra conductor said he felt Booth's hot breath as the assassin pushed past him and struck at him with the knife. He did not attempt to stop Booth, nor did anyone in the cast try. Booth had taken all the actors backstage by surprise and rushed past them. A voice cried out from the president's box, "Stop that man!" Some in the audience gasped with fright and delight. They still thought it was part of the play. "Will no one stop that man?" In anguish, Major Rathbone again pleaded to the crowd below. Clara Harris shouted out, "He has shot the president."
So this is one of the most infamous moments in American history for sure. Tomorrow we're kind of going to talk about the effects and what happened to Booth, so make sure you come back for that. And for now, go answer those little questions, and I will see you tomorrow for another chapter. So stay tuned for that. See you then. Bye, gremlins.